Hi, I'm Haroon.
My name's Sammy, and today we'll be discussing Caudillismo in 19th century Latin America. So, in the early independent period in Latin America, conflict between Caudillos and proponents of the nation state was an overarching struggle that characterized the 19th century. This struggle represents a number of severe contrasts that can be seen as endemic issues from the colonial period.
Another strong contrast emerged after independence in the form of the dichotomy between clientelism and liberalism, as these provided two fundamentally different visions for the future of Latin America. Whereas liberals sought to rule through the implementation of abstract ideas such as institutionalized forms of government, citizenship, and a social contract, Caudillos and their supporters only concerned themselves with local issues and immediate solutions. This serves to illustrate two different imaginings of Latin American society.
The term caudillo refers to a specific type of political leader who gains respect and authority from a charismatic personality and through demonstrations of service to his supporters. A caudillo's image was his most important tool for growing and maintaining power. Typically, caudillos were mostly concerned with presenting their strength to the world, and images of masculinity were circulated. In a caudillo's power base, followers supported the individual himself, rather than any abstract concept of nationhood, because the caudillo was able to immediately provide tangible benefits. A caudillo's rule is based on the concept of clientelism, which is a system where a leader, or patron, gives material support and protection in exchange for loyalty. In a clientelist system, such as caudillismo, a follower's social standing depends in large part on his or her proximity to the patron.
The 19th century in Latin America was characterized by a volatile landscape of conflict within the newly independent nations that were still struggling to find stability. The collapse of long-established colonial governance left the inhabitants of the former Spanish Empire regionalized and fragmented. In the aftermath, there was no widely accepted belief in any single governmental construct. In historically powerful urban environments, the idea of a nation-state took hold, but centralized governments struggled to impose their authority on the frontiers of the newly independent states. The retreat of the empire removed the bonds that had held the various constituent parts of Latin American society together, and quickly the region deteriorated into bands of local loyalty and conflict. Furthermore, constant internal fighting between factions made the vast area of Latin America seemingly ungovernable, causing society to turn inwards. During this period, many people were not concerned by issues outside of their locality. This was not a new phenomenon. Many rural people had already been locally oriented, but it is a dynamic that Caudillos were able to exploit in the absence of a formal state. This gave rise to a system of strong regional leaders who navigated this unstable landscape through the use of force. For example, during the War of Reform that rocked Mexico during the mid-19th century, the Sonoran caudillo Ignacio Pesqueira tried to involve himself in national politics. However, many of his followers deserted him after he attempted to support President Benito Juárez's war against the invading French army. The Sonorans that Pesqueira had sent had no sense of obligation towards the Mexican state and were unwilling to fight for anything beyond their immediate needs. This marked the beginning of the Caudillo Pesqueira's decline. Ultimately, Caudillos during this period ruled with the mutual understanding from their clients that only a strong leader with local connections could carry the community.
Across Latin America, caudillo leaders differed from one another wildly. One of the best-known leaders, Juan Manuel de Rosas, the Caudillo of Buenos Aires, was a wealthy landowner before he gained his military power. However, elsewhere, some caudillos built up their fortune through military triumphs. Furthermore, different caudillos varied in occupation, political leanings, and even race. It is perhaps precisely for this reason that some caudillos were so successful. Their social hierarchy was inclusive to the lower classes because anyone could become a valued member of a caudillo social network depending on loyalty, and there were no barriers to entry. Caudillismo represented a rejection of traditionally stratified society and an alternate path for those who had routinely been held back by their poverty. The one characteristic that all caudillos shared was their localized method of governance from atop a network of vertical patron-client relationships. In a political context, this hierarchy is formed by a national caudillo who gets his power from support by important landowning families, who in turn are lent support from the middle and lower classes of society. Often, a successful Caudillo would take on titles to give the appearance of a rule legitimized by a series of accepted institutions. In reality, this was just for show, and the real source of their power lay in the fact that they were supported by a network of interpersonal relationships. These relationships would have to be continually demonstrated through face-to-face interactions, either by giving patronage or through military prowess shown by dealing with the frequent insurgency of rival caudillos that characterized the 19th century in Latin America.
From the Argentine Esteban Echeverria's allegory, The Slaughterhouse, we see how the long conflict with Caudillos was represented to many liberals. In context, Echeverria wrote this short story in 1840 while exiled in Uruguay. Argentina at the time was sharply divided along urban and rural lines. In the capital of Buenos Aires, a political party known as the Unitarians was in control, and they were in favor of a strong central government to bring the entire country out of its perceived backwardness. However, in the rural provinces outside of Buenos Aires, a rival group known as the Federalists maintained a stronghold, and they fought to live independently of the central government. In addition to the geographical disparity, Unitarians also tended to be from wealthier families and be more highly educated. In The Slaughterhouse, Echeverria depicts all of these severe contrasts by portraying the rural people of Argentina as dirty, savage, and animalistic. Throughout Latin American history, dating as far back as the first contact between the Americas and Europe in 1492, the supposed clash between civilization and barbarism has defined much of the region's self-reflection. This endemic conflict forms the backbone of Echeverria's political allegory, where the Federalists seem to mock governmental institutions, which we can see from the character of the judge. A judge would ordinarily indicate the presence of civil institutions and the rule of law, but in this story, the judge is as barbarous as the rest of the Federalists and seems to mock the institutions of European civilization. In The Slaughterhouse, the judge seems to be a human manifestation of the rejection of a social contract and republicanism. Furthermore, Echeverria's portrayal of the Unitarians' appearance as European points to the idea of following a path of creating an orderly European society in the still undomesticated Americas. The Federalist villains are seen as savages precisely because they are not part of this European tradition. But Echeverria's clearest evidence of this is race. This is an extension of the established social hierarchies from the colonial era. Furthermore, the frequent biblical allusions such as the Unitarians' execution compared to the martyrdom of Christ draws parallels with an imperial narrative of colonial history where a Christian hero tames a race of savages or dies trying. The invention of an independent nation-state was a long, turbulent process that took place much later than the actual date of independence, as Argentina in Echeverria's time was undergoing a crisis of identity. Indeed, the formation of a nation-state is very much an ongoing process today.
The same class divide that Echeverria writes about and reinforces led large sectors of the population to support their local caudillo. Caudillos welcomed the lower classes and marginalized communities into their ranks, whereas many of the liberal elites alienated them. This often created even stronger bonds between lower class communities and the caudillos because the common people would feel indebted to the leader for giving them a chance to elevate their social standing. Furthermore, caudillos were popular because they had to be. The only way for them to maintain their position atop a complicated network of personal relationships was to always strive to please the most people. The caudillos were results-oriented and held on to power through a combination of populist practices and the authoritarian use of force to shut down rivals. Whenever one caudillo fell, another would quickly rise in the same province to take his place. This cycle of rebellion and violence meant that people would only support the caudillo with the strongest image, because he was most likely to be able to provide stability and protection. In this way, choosing a strong leader to support was practically the only way for the lower classes to participate in any political process. Additionally, a caudillo could enact change immediately and offer tangible benefits to the marginalized people who supported him, whereas the abstract concepts of liberalism could only offer an uncertain and distant future.
The caudillos of Latin America flourished in the absence of a state presence. Going back to the example of Ignacio Pesqueira's career in northern Mexico, The Caudillos' power base of personal alliances was eroded as President Porfirio Diaz's central government extended state control northwards, laying down railroad and telegraph lines across the frontier that effectively closed the distance between Sonora and Mexico City. This modernization saw to the end of classical caudillismo in Mexico, but politics in Latin America today still follow patterns of caudillo governance.
Although the traditional caudillo no longer exists, the term is still used today in a more general sense, and is applied to many Latin American political leaders who gain power or look to maintain power through similar means. Ex-Honduran President Manuel Zelaya was ousted by his own government and military in 2009 over fears of him becoming another caudillo. Zelaya, like many of his contemporaries, was looking to change the constitution so that there would be no limit on how many terms he could be president. To quote David Lunhow, Jose de Cordoba, and Nicholas Casey of the Wall Street Journal, when democracy took root in Latin America in the 1980s and 90s, nearly every country opted to bar re-election as a way to ensure caudillos would never return. With Mr. Zelaya, Honduran power brokers decided not to take any chances. In booting him out at gunpoint, they showed what little faith they had in the country's institutions to check Mr. Zelaya's ambitions. The article goes on to discuss other modern-day caudillos in Latin America, including Hugo Chavez and Evo Morales. Quote, both men used populism and disappointment with existing political parties to cast themselves as their nation's saviors. End quote. So, although Latin American politics has changed dramatically since the 19th century, the legacy of colonialism and elements of caudillaje still persists to this day.
In their own times, caudillos all earned the respect of their local communities. They built a base of support by providing security when state institutions could not. Caudillos across Latin America operated with a network of personal relationships, which was more accessible to the rural population than the ineffectual concepts of the nation-state that had taken hold among certain educated elites. Patronage structures seemed more tangible than those loose concepts that structured a state society. Ultimately, the success and decline of caudillos in the region reflected symbolic choices of identity.
Thank you for listening, and hope that you learned something about caudillos.